Hey everybody, just give me a minute here as we get set up. If you're going back and watching the recording of this stream, I should be all ready to go here in just like 2 minutes if you want to skip ahead. Test, test, test. Okay. Okay, looks like we're good to go. Okay, this is another morning stream, so probably not going to be a lot of people tuning in. No worries. I'm actually just recording this separately, which I need to start doing now. So, okay, good. Recording's running and we're streaming. Perfect. So yeah, I was just working on like a how-to walkthrough of doing one of the dashboards that I do. I post these on TikTok a lot, and I'll post them here on YouTube as well. It's just going to be like a walkthrough start to finish with a sample data set, kind of showing how I do my thing. So for this example, I am using some sample data. This sample data is from Microsoft. It's a little dated, but it's okay. I think it's from like 2013, 2014. And if you want to find that sample data, you can find it here. It is sample data from Microsoft. Just you go to the Microsoft website and search sample financial data. Okay, so first things first, whenever I'm building these dashboards, I have to ask myself, hey, do I want a dark theme or a light theme? I'm going to go with a dark theme this time, I think. People seem to really like dark themes. And honestly, I don't know. I think they're kind of in style for a reason. They're not always the most accessible, though, so always consider that. If you're going to make a dark theme, make sure it's got enough contrast that somebody who has any kind of visual impairment can still read it and interpret it. So, big background, first thing I do, I insert a shape. Under the Insert tab, there's Shapes. And I just block things out, usually with rounded rectangles, right? It's just kind of like if you were doing a app or a website wireframe, right? So you just drop something in. In this case, I'm doing a solid fill with fairly high transparency. And then I'm going to section it out with another rectangle that's inserted. This one's a gradient from a very transparent light color to a fully transparent light color. And that just creates this little glassy separator you see here. Okay, so let's hop into the fun stuff. So when I build dashboards like this, I typically have 3 tabs. One is my sample data, where I just put my raw data. If I was like adding data to my table, I would add it at the bottom of this table each week or each month or whenever I add data. And this is kind of like separating it from everything else, right? We want to have it kind of live in its own place. Then I have like a pivot table or a data processing tab. This is where I'm doing calculations, formulas, getting everything into the right shape, right? Any kind of processing of the data happens here. And then last but not least, a dashboard tab. And this is where we'll actually put our visualizations and that sort of thing. So I always suggest people get started by really getting familiar with your sample data. You really need to understand what's getting put into your table. How's it being reported? How's it broken down? Making sure your table's clean, right? Meaning you've got a single header, no merged cells, everything's in a consistent format, all that kind of stuff. And then really understand what's being entered here. So here we've got segment, country, product, and date. Way over here we've got date. So when I look at my table, I'm able to interpret that every month we are entering in data for every single product here, and we're breaking it down by country, and within each country, segment being like market segment, in this case government, mid-market, channel partners, that sort of thing, enterprise. So I know that each line of this table is giving us one entry for a particular segment in a particular country for a particular product on a particular month. It sounds convoluted, but understanding that's really important when we think about how we visualize our data. So just to add something more visually engaging up here, I'm going to hop over to our pivots and just create a quick pivot table. So under the Insert tab, Pivot Table. Always name your tables. So in this case, I've named my table Financials, so I can reference it here. And then over on the right, that's where we start dropping in our metrics and all of that kind of fun stuff. So I'm going to do date, and let's just do sales. That's an easy place to start. If you are having problem in your own dashboard getting your dates to aggregate right like this, check out the, give me a second here, group selection button under the pivot table analyze tab. And if you go to group selection, you can hold control and click these and it'll break your dates down into different aggregations. So if we wanted to show months and years, we can click both those, hit OK, and it breaks it down to month and years. That's just a big time saver if you are having issues with your own dates. Mine are nice and clean, so they work really well. But if yours aren't, it's worth trying. Okay, and then go to our design. Let's pull grand totals out of here, just so we have a nice clean table. And then I always like to do a couple things. I like to rename my values because it always says sum of, and it is a sum, but we just don't need that when we talk about it. So I'm just putting sales in here. I put a space after it because otherwise it'll get confused. And because sales is already being used as a reference somewhere else, so I just add an extra space and then it doesn't cross-reference. And then we're going to go to field settings. And we're going to go to number under field settings. I'm sorry, you folks couldn't see that, but there is a little thing here where it says number. And we're just going to turn this into currency. Well, let's go to accounting. And I don't need any decimal places because we're working with bigger numbers here. Okay, great. So now we've got our sales. This looks great. So we're going to click into our table and hit insert and go to pivot chart. So pivot chart is a chart powered by a pivot table. It will always default to this little blue bar chart. If you don't want that as your chart type, you just go to the design tab, hit change chart type, and you change it to whatever you want. So for this one, I'm going to do something a little fancy. We're going to do a area chart, 2D area chart. And I'm going to cut this and paste it over. Drop this in our dashboard, bring it over. Okay, so first we're going to clean this up. So we're going to take out our title. We're going to add our title separately with text. We're going to take out our background. You'll hear me say this on basically every video. You don't want any background, you don't want any border. And because we've got a dark background, we want to make sure our font is contrasty enough that you can read it. So we've changed it to a white font. And even then, it's still not ideal, but it's more legible than it was before. All right. Cool. Hey, if anybody's in the stream too, feel free to comment in the chat if there's any questions, comments, and if the audio is working and all that kind of stuff. I just love hearing from people in the chat. Okay, cool. So we've got this. I like it. It's looking pretty good. I've got the size kind of where I want it. Now what I want to do in this case is I want to get a little fancy. So first thing I'm going to do is take my grid lines here, click into those, and we're going to change those to a dash. I just like a dashed grid line personally, just personal preference. I'm going to make them a little transparent so they're not so bright. And there's a very bright line down here too, which we're going to make a little lighter. And hold on one second, I'm going to grab my cats. You guys definitely want to see the cats, and this will take 2 seconds. It's worth it. I'm going to stick around. Come here, Vinny. Come say hi to the people. Come say hi to the people. Ta-da! Okay, there we go. Gummy says hi. He's a little grumpy boy. He's a little grumpy boy. All right. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to turn this into a gradient fill. So what I'm going to do is go to gradient fill. It auto-filled to this one. I actually kind of like this, but I want it a little darker. So we're going to go to our gradient. So a few things with gradient. You want linear. Typically, linear is just a line. Radial is going to be a circle. Rectangular is going to be a rectangle. Most of the time, you're just going to use linear. Make sure your angle is correct. I have 90 degrees because I want it straight up and down, but you can do any other angle. And in this case, I want to make it a little darker on top. So let's go like right there, maybe. And you can add steps in your gradient. So a gradient can be one color to another, or you can have it from one color to another color to another color, right? So in this case, I think I'm going to try a little experiment. I'm going to add in like a purpley color, I think, in this case. I like to use the RGB slider here. Or excuse me, I like to use the color wheel for this. So I'm going to do a purple in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it transparent. And it just kind of gives us a second level, which I think is going to look good. Okay, great. So we've got this basic layout for this light chart. I'm going to make it a little more contrasty. And again, we're making it a little more contrasty, meaning we're having more contrast between our chart and the background. And I'm doing this so that it's a little more accessible for folks that might not be able to see it as well. And we're going to do one other thing to make it even easier to see and interpret. Oh, hey, Mark Beach is in here. Perfect timing. I'm trying to put together a dashboard from scratch now and was looking for your videos as guidance. Awesome. Mark, awesome to see you. You're one of the folks I love seeing between here and TikTok. It's awesome seeing that. I didn't realize that, based on your TikTok name, I didn't realize it was the same person, but obviously it is with the last name. All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna paste it and drag this over. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change this chart type here. I'm going to go to Design, Change Chart Type. I'm going to turn this into a line chart. Okay, good. And then I'm going to change the color to white. In this case, I think. Well, we'll try a couple different colors, but let's start with white. And you also, with line charts like this, have to update the marker. So I like to do no border on them, just so I only have one thing to change at a time. And then just do my fill color. And if you want to change marker size, it's under marker options. Okay, cool. Let's see how that looks. Okay, good. Now, if I have done this correctly, this should, this should overlay perfectly. Yeah, okay, well, almost. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to remove our labels on our second chart. And bear with me on this, folks. I know it seems weird, like what is he doing, but I promise it's all going to make sense in just a moment. And we're going to remove our grid lines as well. So we just have that line. Now this line should, if we adjust it a little bit, align perfectly with our other chart. And if we get it aligned just right, oh, we want it a little bigger. Oops, a little smaller. Oh. So if we get this aligned just right, it should work just about perfectly every time we adjust it. Oh, sorry about that. It can be a little tricky getting this perfect because you have to have it, everything has to be the same width, etc. I'm going to have to change my width a tiny bit. That should do it. Okay. So what this should do now is we should essentially have the two charts align with each other, and we've got a nice clean line for our line chart with this nice gradient behind it. That's how you get that effect. You see it in a lot of, you'll see this in a lot of Excel stuff people do. It's very trendy to use this kind of gradient in the background right now. I don't know why exactly, people just seem to love it. So that's how you do it. Okay, so, and let's say, hey, like we want to have some metrics in here, obviously, so we have to get those metrics over here first into our pivot table, so we have the data to reference. Okay, so I'm not going to use, I'm going to skip some best practices here, folks. We're just going to reference some cells instead of doing a bunch of processing because I don't have a lot of time. So here's what we're going to do. Let's say we want the most recent month, or even better, how about the grand total? Well, no, let's do most recent month. I think grand total doesn't make sense with this data because it's just going back a few months to randomly to September. So what we're going to do instead is just grab the most recent month, and we're going to do that by going to our dashboard, hitting Insert, Text Box, that's under the Insert tab, drop it in. It's going to look really weird by default. It's going to have a outline for some reason and a solid fill. We don't want any of that. We turn that all off. And then in the formula bar, we hit equals. Go over to the cell we want, most recent. Now, this isn't best practice because this is going to break when the pivot table updates. So we might change this later, but for now, we're just going to do this, and it might not work. Yeah, it's going to be, this formula is missing a range reference or a defined name. Oh, okay, I personally always kind of have a headache getting this get pivot data reference to work. So instead of doing that, we're going to do something else. Where can I grab this? Hold on, bear with me, folks. We're going to grab a formula from over here. Yeah, that's our lookup. Perfect. I'm going to drop this in here. So right above my pivot table, I'm putting in a lookup formula. And this lookup formula is essentially saying, look down this column and get the very last value in it. Because this is in chronological order, the last value is the most recent value in time. So it's going to give us essentially our bottom cell in the column, which is what we want. And now when we go over to our dashboard in our text box, we select our text box, go to our formula bar, hit equals, go back over to our pivot, select it, boom, and now we've got that in our text box, and we can style it however we want. We can make it look good. This has a really interesting number format that I'm using, so this is shrinking it down to 12.0 million, and that's just because this number varies a lot, so we want it to take up a set amount of space. We don't want it getting too big or too small. Let's do that, and then maybe we make it an interesting color. So, oh, oops. I always have trouble selecting things while I'm holding the cat and using a mouse and doing all this at the same time. So let's think about colors here. Do we want a purple? No, that's not looking right. What could we do? So I'm just thinking about colors here for this. I kind of want it to stand out. It has to be light because we need contrast here. But maybe we do something like that. And we could even, if we want to be fancy in the format shape thing, we might be able to give this a glow. Let's see what happens. And no, glow's not going to work on this. That's okay. So there's our, let's say this is our core metric. Our dashboard's focusing on sales. This is the most recent sales value from our pivot table. And we're just pointing the text box at this cell so that the text box has the value in it. Again, just by hitting equals in the formula bar and selecting a cell. Awesome. Obviously, we want people to know what this value is, so we got to add in another text box. In this case, I'll just drop a new one in. And as always with text box, no fill, no line. We just want to put text there. We don't need anything else. And I will typically do this in a slightly different color if it's a title. So, sales latest month reported or something like that is what we'll call this. And then we'll make it a little bigger. Oh, excuse me, make it a little bigger. A little smaller, okay. So label size, label design, fonts, all of that. A little more art than science. Mark says, lol, I didn't realize you had noticed me. Honestly, I feel like I'm stalking you as you're always on my LinkedIn/TikTok and YouTube across my work and personal accounts. Loving your work. Mark, no worries, man. Happy to hear that. And yeah, it's just funny. I think if you're somebody who's like into Excel reporting, our pool of people that are kind of like interested in this topic is so small that you kind of like see the same people over and over again everywhere. It's funny how that works. Okay, so let's get our metrics up there. Maybe we'll pull this up a little bit. And so really you guys can see I'm just kind of finessing things here. I'm not like, this is kind of a creative exercise, right? We're thinking about our layout. I am thinking about where everything's being placed. And for some strange reason, I've been having multi-select not work for me in Excel lately. And I think it's just something with my machine. Okay, so another thing, excuse me. Oh, well, there we go. Which camera? Okay. Another thing to keep in mind here as we're laying these out is we want to really think about alignment just right from the beginning, right? So the reason I kind of blocked this out with rectangles first was to kind of give some guidelines to use, like keep this far from the side, right? Keep this far from the top. Make sure, for example, that this chunk of text has equal spacing above, below, and on the side, right? We're just trying to keep everything nice and clean and even and all that. It's so easy to forget to do that, but it's like one of the secrets, I think, to making reports that just look really good. I think it's like the easiest thing somebody can do to make reports that look really good. Okay, so sales last month reported 12 million. And so let's think about, like, if we're showing sales and we're thinking about latest month reported, what else do we need to give context for that to make it make more sense? So we probably want to either see the previous month's value, or maybe the average of the previous few months, or how much it's changed since the previous month. So you'll see me do a lot of this stuff in my dashboard. So what we're going to do is I want to get a value for the change from the previous month. So in our pivot table, I'm going to go to our pivot table fields here on the right. I'm going to add sales again, right? So that I'm going to add the same value one more time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click this sales value. And actually that might have broken our chart. Give me 1 second. Let me see. Yeah, oh shoot. Okay, so don't do what I just did. Hold on. We're going to Control Z that because it'll break your chart. So instead we're going to actually just add a new pivot table and do it in a separate space. So we drop in a pivot table, reference our core table financials where all our data lives, and always name your tables so that you can do that. I always remind everyone to do that. You want to name your tables. And just like last time for our other table, we're going to do date and we're going to do sales. And this actually we don't need the pivot chart for this, so we're good. So I'm going to do a few things again. I'm going to, in my design tab, I'm going to turn off grand totals because we don't need them. And then I am going to click into sum of sales in the pivot table field selector. I'm going to right click it, hit field settings. So first thing I'm going to do is just turn this into an accounting value. So we're just changing the format so it shows up right. Then we're going to go show data as, and we're going to show data as percentage difference from. Yeah, we'll do percentage difference from date previous. So what does this do? It is going to give us the change from the previous month for each month's value. You can do all sorts of other stuff in here too. You can do percentage of whole or difference from, total difference from instead of percentage difference from, or percentage of the grand total, or all these different things, right? So we have amazing processing we can do in the pivot table field settings area here. We're going to hit OK. It's going to give us percentage change, which looks good, but there's one issue, which is I want to have a plus or a minus value, and right now it's only showing a minus value if it's negative, no plus value. So I think what we can do here is go to more number formats, custom, and I'm just going to add a quick number format in here. So, okay, so what we want is, I always get this wrong the first time, so bear with me everyone. I think we want plus, oh, excuse me, plus, no, we want plus number percent. I believe this is going to work. And then we want colon number percent. And then we want colon minus number percent. Is that going to work? Let's see what happens. Almost, but not quite. That's okay. Well, for now we're just going to live with what we got because I cannot remember for the life of me what the right formula is for that. So let's just take off the decimal places and we'll work with it. Okay. Great. All right. So yeah, sorry, we've got boring pivot tables up, everyone. I got more exciting stuff coming here in a sec. Okay, so we're going to go to our dashboard. Well, actually, no, first we're going to copy over our lookup. And that lookup is now got to change to the right format. Yep, okay. So this lookup that we just added is grabbing the bottom value from our column. That's all it's doing, nothing fancy there. And as always, folks, if you just joined, feel free to ask questions as we go. And what we're going to do is go back over to our dashboard, copy paste our text box over in the formula bar. We're going to go equals, go back over to our pivot table and just click on whatever cell we want it to pull the data from. So now, if you can see it, that's just now pulling data from that other cell. So we've got this other value. So what I kind of ideally want here is I want to show, hey, here's our value, here's how much it changed since the previous period. So what I might do is just pull all this down a little. Let's pull all this down, leave a little room. And then maybe we'll just add a text box here that says something like, change from last month. How about something like that? And then maybe just a colon so there's no confusion. and then we can drag this over, and then we have something like that. So that's like, you see, hey, here's my latest month reported value, and then beneath it, it says change from last month, so you know how much it's changed from the previous month. I think that's a little more useful than just showing a sales number by itself. And when you combine that with stuff like this, like with the actual chart, then it becomes a little more valuable even than it was before. Now we could, in theory, actually put this here, right? And if we did that, we might just need to change our formatting a little bit. I'm debating if I want to do that, but for now we'll leave it here. I think it's nice having a little extra room on it. And another thing always to keep in mind here is adding proper labels. So right now, yeah, this chart's useful, but it takes a little cognitive load to like look at the grid lines and figure out what value each value is. So what we might want to do is go to the Design tab, Add Chart Element, add in some labels. The problem with labels is they don't always fit where you want them to, but let's just try doing above and see what it looks like. So as you can see, the labels are like, it's a little tough to see all of them. So what I might do in a situation like this, really the labels I care about the most are the current month and the previous month. So you could literally delete the other labels and actually just move these other ones around a little to make them look right. I think in that case, it might make a little more sense. So if we just click into our other ones and remove them. Now this is relatively easy because we only have, a few months here, but obviously if we had like 100 months of data, you wouldn't want to do this manual process. You might just need to find another way to label it. And there we go. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of works. I think it can also be confusing not having complete labels across it, but I think that works okay for now. Okay, so I always like to think about hierarchy of information, right? When we were in this example, we were saying, hey, sales is the most important value. So what's the second most important value, or like a contextual value that is important here? Well, it's the change from the previous month in sales. Okay, that's useful, awesome. But what else might we need here in this case? I think we might need to break this down by product. So let's go to our pivot tables here. We're going to insert a pivot table. Actually, we're going to insert a pivot chart. And a pivot chart, again, it's just creating a pivot table, and that's powering a chart. So we've got to select what we want in this. Okay, so we want to break this down by product, and we want product broken down by sales. I guess in this case we want sales. Yeah, let's do sales. Now this might be a little more useful for somebody looking at this who their job centers around seeing sales of individual products. Maybe seeing total products, not as helpful, but the breakdown might be really important contextual information. Another way that we could split this based off of our source data is we could also say, maybe instead of product, we go segment. Maybe it's for the high level reporting somebody's doing. Oops, let's move that over. Maybe it's more important to see it broken down by segment. Either way, both of these breakdowns could be useful. It just depends on your audience. Let me remove the grand totals. Okay, so I think this actually is more useful. What I'm going to do is take this, go to design, change chart type. I'm going to do a horizontal bar, or excuse me, yeah, horizontal bar. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, and I'm going to cut this and paste it over. Oh, Feiruz said sales by product is exactly what I wanted to ask about. Yay, that's so cool. I love it when people pop on and it's like exactly what they were looking for. Mark Peach says, I wasn't into Excel reporting, but you made it look so accessible and so relaxing to watch. You do your magic. I couldn't help but trying it myself, and workers love the result. That's so cool, Mark. Like you probably hear me going on and on about this on the streams, but like, I really want everyone to just like get a raise at work. That's kind of my goal. I want to teach people how to do really cool Excel stuff that impresses their work and makes everyone go wow and gets them a promotion. And so whenever I hear stuff like that, I'm like, yes, it's working. Mark says, I summarized a big bit of analysis by creating a cool dashboard from what I've learned from your and presented to a steering group. Awesome. At the end during the Q&A, one of the guys said, sorry, I wasn't really listening because the graphs were so pretty. I got distracted. Hey, it's funny to say this, but you actually can distract people sometimes because the charts are so good and so visually interesting. It's something that people kind of forget about sometimes, that like great visuals, they can sometimes be distracting. So it's always important to have the great visuals paired with the insights in such a way that somebody, even if they are distracted, they're getting distracted by super valuable data, if that makes sense. Okay, so we got all this stuff in here. A couple things to keep in mind. We're trying to fit a lot of information in a small space. So we have to think about the spacing of our bars. That's really important here. So we're going to click into our bars and adjust our series overlap a little. Actually, no, I'm sorry, not series overlap. Our gap width, which I'm going to turn down. And as I turn that down, it's going to remove the big gaps in between these, and then I can make it a little smaller, and it starts to fit a little more nicely into this tiny little space we have here. And I also, of course, want to remove the outline around this, so it's just floating. Let's see how that looks like. Okay, I kind of like that. Maybe if we put it here and then we added a label, it'll work better. So we got it there. Let's change our color to match our adjacent color, because we're doing obviously a breakdown. We want it to relate to our other thing. And then we'll call this sales by segment. Did I accidentally? Okay, good. Yeah, that could work. I don't like how the text looks on this right now. It's always hard to get labels in these and make them look nice and clean. So I'm just going to set it here for now. We can adjust it later. Okay, so there we go. And sometimes on these two, I will just click into anything, in this case a series, my data series, and I'll just play with the transparency a little bit. Transparency is a great way to just like emphasize or de-emphasize a certain area, create more or less contrast. And it also, if you add one shape, let's say like it can literally be anything. Let's just insert a random shape here. If you insert any random shape and then you adjust the transparency, that is kind of a terrifying smiley face, isn't it? Anyway, if you adjust your transparency for the fill, it will make the color palettes match a little bit better, right? So if you have really transparent colors, if they're layered on other colors, they tend to kind of match up a little bit better. It's not a perfect solution because transparency makes things harder to see, so you don't want to do it too much, but it can be a useful trick. Okay, and then maybe we throw some labels in here. It's a little difficult. We don't have a lot of space, so we're just going to have to test out the labels and see what they look like. We're under the Design tab when we're clicked in our pivot chart, and then we're going to add element, data labels. Let's go. Oh, interesting. It's giving us the wrong data label options. It's giving us data label options for a line chart, even though we have a bar chart, which is unusual. But let's just go center and see what happens. Okay, so those are obviously not looking great. Part of it's just the formatting, though. So we can click into them, go to our format data labels on the far right here. And do we want leader lines? No. We just want the value, and we can go to number category. We're going to go to accounting. We're going to go to 0 for the there, and then we're going to make them smaller. Okay, now we got some labels in there. Great. Not the prettiest labels ever, but they get the job done. Okay. Oh, we got 6 people. And hey, everybody who's in here who just joined, welcome. Great to have you. We're just doing a dashboard example. I was just recording this whole thing for a video, and I figured I might as well stream it while I'm recording. Why not? I will probably get the cats on screen again later too. If you're here for the cats, they're coming. Okay, so we've got sales. We've got change from the last month. We've got it broken down by segment. We've got this nice cool pretty line chart with the area chart behind it. I was actually just thinking that this could be a lot brighter. So I'm going to do that. We're going to change one part of our gradient to this purple color we were using. And I think that might be enough to make it stand out a little more. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, oops. How does that look? Oops. I think that looks a little better. I like a little extra glow there. You'll see a lot of my stuff, like I'll just do fun little things where I'll, like in this case, have my shape. Maybe we'll add a line. A line is just like a line along the outside edge. We'll do like a color that's bright, make it a little wider, in this case like maybe 2 point. Okay, so this just by itself might not look great, but what you can do and what can be fun to do with these is to add a glow. Glow is just like adding a essentially a glow. It makes it glow a little bit. So that was too much, but we're going to adjust it and turn it down and then make it transparent. And so with a little bit of glowiness, you can just kind of make things feel, it can kind of just make things feel like a little space agey. It adds just like a little extra pop to it. It can be fun. In this case, well, maybe we'll leave it. I don't know. Let's see. We can always adjust as we go. Cool. Sorry, I was just looking at the chat in case anybody had any questions. Okay. Yeah, I think this is a little off. What can we do to get this right? Sorry, I'm just trying to get my my charts aligned perfectly here, because if they're just a little off, it can be really distracting. So I'm just adjusting them a little. Sorry, folks. Bear with me here as we get these aligned a little better. Come on. Come on. I've been having this weird error in Excel where it sort of has trouble selecting things properly. And I have not been able to pinpoint what exactly is going on with my machine that is causing it. So I'll try to adjust things and won't let me select the right window. Okay. Right. So we've got our sales by segment, our overall sales, our change from the last month, and our line chart. So I'm kind of thinking, hey, we still have a lot of real estate here to work with in terms of the screen. You know, what can we add to this that's valuable? What's kind of a breakdown that's going to give us a deeper insight into this? So there's a lot we can do, but sales data by itself maybe isn't enough in this case, right? If we go back to our actual data table here, we've got all this other stuff too. We've got sale price, gross sale, we've got manufacturing, I believe it's manufacturing price, units sold, cost of goods sold, all sorts of stuff, profit. So I kind of think it's useful maybe in this context to see sales alongside actual profit, because in this case there's things like discounts that are given and different unit prices and stuff. So maybe it's useful for us to see that sales value in the context of profit as well. And there's lots of visualizations we can do, but first let's just make the pivot table, and then we'll choose the visualization after we have the pivot table. So in this case, we're going to go insert, we'll drop in a pivot chart. Again, pivot charts are just going to add a pivot table that powers a chart. Okay, and we'll go to our pivot chart field. So we know we want to see it by month still. I think the date matters. And then we know we want sales, and we know we want profit. So we'll have two different series here, and you can see how it's kind of by default given us this bar chart that is now a double bar chart, shows us both the values. So let's see. Well, first what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this. I'm going to paste it into our dashboard. So we're looking at it in the context of the actual place where we're putting the chart. Cool. Oh, we've got another Mark in the chat. Hi, Mark Uneva. Thanks for joining. So let's bring this down here. Okay. So here's the thing. I don't like to stack lots of time series charts right one on top of the other, right? So we've got a time series chart up here. This is another time series chart beneath it. And so I'm thinking about maybe other ways to present this that aren't just going to be time series on time series. So it's okay. We'll play with some chart types, but I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to answer a couple of questions I just saw in the chat. So Feyruz says, Josh, how do you deal with the urge to adjust colors and shapes every few minutes? As a perfectionist, it takes me hours to do any simple dashboard work. Yeah, I know. So part of it is it gets easier with time because you've kind of done enough projects that you kind of have a feel for what's good enough and what's not good enough. But a lot of it is just kind of just understanding that perfect is the enemy of done, right? And that you have to understand, like, hey, if this looks good, it doesn't have to be better oftentimes, right? And that the time to output ratio of getting something really, really, really super perfected is not great. Like, you'll notice in all the free templates and stuff I send out in the newsletter that they have a lot of imperfections, and I often ask people in the tutorials I say like, hey, what would you change about this? What are the problems? So that they learn to kind of recognize those themselves. And I have to do that because I only have a limited amount of time. I have my work that I do. I kind of just do this on the side. So there's really a balance there of like, hey, if it looks great, that's enough for now, and it doesn't have to always be perfect. Mark Uneva says, why do pivot charts break when you update the data and update the chart? So they shouldn't be breaking. They will break if you've changed your names, right? If you've changed your naming conventions, if you change the underlying structure of your table, like you've added extra columns and stuff, that might break them. And I have noticed that they will also sometimes break if you have one of your filtering options being something that has 0 values in it. For some reason, that will sometimes clear out pivot chart styles. I don't know what that's about, but that will happen sometimes. Okay, cool. Back to figuring out how we want to show sales versus profit. So here's what I'm thinking. I don't necessarily know, like I said, if showing yet another time series beneath the time series above it is the right move here. I do think we are going to add a timeline selector in this, which will kind of define the date ranges. So what I'm thinking, maybe, is that instead we add a chart that just shows this for a single point in time instead of over time. So like if we go back to our pivot table, we can click into this, and instead of having date in our row, we can remove that. And it's just going to give us 2 whole values. And if we go back to our dashboard, our chart will have broken, probably. There we go. And we're just going to see 2 whole values. So this can work if the date range is defined separately. And maybe what we do with this is we change this to something else in terms of chart type. So what could we do with this? 2 bars. Maybe we could do 2 bars. A donut. I don't think a donut's the right chart for this. Combos, templates. I think maybe in this case, yeah, I don't want to use yet another. I don't want to use yet another horizontal bar, so maybe we just do vertical bar and we shrink it down. And maybe that ratio goes over here. And then we think of something else to put alongside it as well. Oh, hey, we got 7 people in. And yeah, hey, anybody new who's joining, feel free to ask questions and stuff. I got the chat open. I'm keeping an eye on it every once in a while as I build this thing out. As always, I try to keep the vibes pretty chill on these. Try to go a little ASMR-y as much as I can so that like it's not stressing anybody out. The bottom chart, why not show net profit over time? Yeah, Mark, I was just mentioning earlier that I sometimes don't like to show one timeline above another timeline above another timeline, but I think it might be the most effective thing here. So I like what you're thinking. I think net profit over time is very valuable, but I'm also thinking maybe net profit over time is something we could also add in here. Because it kind of aligns with the other data we have. Essentially, here's the basic concept or my thinking around it. This is not a super hard set rule. This is just a general principle. if I have time series data that's related, I'd like to keep it in the same chart, and I'd like to keep my time series kind of concise. Like, hey, here's the time series, here's everything over time, so in one place. Because a lot of times you see dashboards where it's just time series tacked on time series tacked on time series. It's just like a bunch of time series charts all next to each other, and it can get confusing because your y-axis changes, your y-axis max and min values change and stuff, and it can be kind of hard to interpret. And that's not always the case. It works in some cases, but in this case, I was just thinking maybe we don't add another time series. What else could we add? And that's also more just like a challenge for me of saying, hey, what can we visualize here that's actually going to be useful? All right. Okay, so we've got this in. I'm just going to style this real quick for kicks. Oh, you know what we can do here? Okay, I'll show you a cool chart type. So this is our this is sales. So what if for sales we're going to do a solid fill? I'm going to do white. I'm going to make it mostly transparent, and then it's going to have a line that's also white around the outside. We'll make that just a tiny transparent. I'm going to make it a little bigger because the default line when you do a line selection can be too small sometimes. Now for this one, this is our profit. We'll do this in that color we've used before. Well, we might want to use a different color because it's not sales. Okay, how about we do, well, we could just do white. Why not? Okay, so what I'm going to do here is go overlap to 100%. So this is kind of like if we take out these ugly grid lines behind it. I'll just remove the grid lines. So what we have now, I know this isn't finished yet, but we have essentially our profit, all of our sales and the percentage of it that's profit listed here, or the total amount of it that's profit listed here. So essentially, it's almost like a profit to sales ratio bar that we have now. And Mark mentions in the chat that transparency makes everything look so much cooler. I totally agree, and you all can probably tell looking at all my stuff that I'm a total sucker for using transparency with like absolutely everything. Okay, so I just switched this from a vertical bar to a horizontal bar. And I just did that under the design change chart type tab. And now I have to just go back and change my series overlap because it clears that when you change chart types. Okay. So again, we now kind of have this ratio bar of profit to sales. So we need to add a legend so people know what they're looking at. Let's do top. And we'll have to change some names here. Yeah, I like that dynamic idea. I think that's super cool, Feiruz. Good call. Okay, cool. And what we also need to do, obviously, our axes are not formatted properly right now. And so there's sometimes you do this in the chart. Like here, we can do it in the chart, change it to accounting, and then remove our decimal places. And it'll format it. But you can also do this by referencing back to your actual pivot table, make sure your pivot table has everything formatted right. Yeah, that sales to profit ratio is no bueno. Well, I know, right? I know. We're looking at this. We're looking at this sample financial data that this is from like Microsoft. It's like some of their sample data, and I always look at it and I'm always kind of like, I don't know what business this is, but I don't want to be in whatever business this is. But there's something funny, and this is, I don't know if anybody works in these industries, but I've worked in production industries before, like things where you're dealing with super high volume production. And oftentimes in those industries, you're really measuring profitability in fractions of a fraction of a percent. And it's because you're dealing with such high volume. So like when you're producing 100 million of something, right? All of a sudden, having a not great sales to profit ratio it matters a little bit less, right? Because when you're making hundreds of millions something, it can be a very, very slim margin, and you can still be making a huge amount of profit off of it. So it can be interesting depending on what industry and data you're looking at. Okay, sorry. So everybody, if you're just wondering what I'm doing, I've right-clicked on my values, changed the number to just change it to something that makes more sense for the data we have here. Great. Just turned it into an accounting value so that it's going to format right. Thanks for bearing with me on that one, everybody. Okay, cool. So this is awesome. Now, here's the thing I don't like about this. We just kind of have arbitrarily added this in. We're working in real time here. The sales profit ratio looks good, but the max and min value, so in this case our x-axes, it's defined as essentially, I think in this case we're going from 0 to 150 million. Great, those bounds are kind of cool, but they're designed to just have a little breathing room on top of this bar. So I don't really want that, because I want to define how wide this chart is and have it be that wide all the time. So we are actually, instead of using a regular horizontal bar chart here, we're going to change this to a 100% horizontal bar chart. It's going to break, maybe. No, didn't break. And that's not working because it's only showing the... Okay, so we're just going to have to make a change here. I have no idea why this is showing 80 to 100%. That doesn't make any sense. This may just be one of those little bugs in Excel. So we have to set our minimum value as 0. Okay, there we go. So this is giving us a much better insight into that margin, and it gives us a set width that's always going to be the same. Excuse me. There we go. And what I'm going to do now is, I always like to kind of think about pairing charts with metrics, right? So if we put this in here and we get it a little less kind of awkward looking, maybe increase the bar width. We're just going to, we just want to kind of clean it up. Once we do that, we're going to leave a little extra room so that we can add a metric in next to it. So there we go. And yeah, because this chart's by itself, we can add labels and stuff, but it's still not going to be the most valuable chart in the world. We're going to add a metric. So the metric we're going to add is the ratio. So let me just grab these. I'm actually just going to grab our text boxes and copy paste them, because it's easier than me inserting a text box and removing the background and doing all that stuff multiple times. So just copy pasting is a big time saver here. Okay, so I think we want this to be sales to profit ratio. Hey, if somebody in the chat is like better at remembering all of the business acronyms that I don't remember from all of my business courses, let me know what I should be calling that sales to profit ratio, because I'm sure there's a better name for it than I'm using there. And then we want to come up with that metric. So what we're going to do is go over to our pivot table. Yeah, I like that color scheme idea. That, Mark, that's a really good thinking. So a lot of this stuff, I think, comes down to using a color metaphor that is consistent. So that doesn't mean we always have to use the same color for everything, but we just want to use colors in a way that's either categorical, like breaking things into categories, or is adding some deeper insight in some meaningful way. So I agree with you there. I'll go back and I'll explain a little bit about my thinking here in just a sec. So, okay, what is our ratio here? We want our ratio. So, sorry folks, I'm doing math live here, so bear with me. Okay, so our sales is this, our profit is this. Do we want to do this as... Yeah, in this case, we literally just want to do profit divided by sales, I think. Now, our get pivot might not work here. Yeah, okay. I think that's correct, right? Somebody's going to call me out if I got that wrong. Please do, because I might have just... It might not actually just be one divided by the other in this case. But it's okay. For this example, we'll work with it. Go back to our dashboard. We want to go equals. Jump back over to our pivot table. Get our value that we just created. We're just clicking on it to point our text box at that value. And then we just want to get our font fixed up here. Maybe 36, like that, maybe. And then bold. And then we know that... So we always want to leave breathing room, right? So like this metric, how much bigger do we think it could get? Well, it's probably not going to get that much bigger in this case, right? So we are going to just give it enough breathing room that it can grow, but you always want to consider how much bigger can a metric get, because your dashboard will break if the metric goes off the page, right? So you got to leave breathing room a lot of the time. So maybe what we do to make this more visually kind of cohesive here is we take all this. So most of my audience and clients are in Western countries for the most part, and we typically read left to right, right? And that left to right reading kind of process is something that translates into our data visualizations, because people are typically starting top left and then moving left to right, top to bottom. That breaks sometimes if you have like a bright attention grabbing element on the page, that sort of thing. But in general, that's what we do. So I will often lead with the information I want somebody to see first on the left, and then put the secondary information I want them to see second on the right. And that's what we've done right here. So sales to profit ratio, 14%. Let's see, maybe we want to add some labels in here. Let's go. Alan Duran Palma asks, do you think it's a good idea to add macros if I want to sell a template? Alan, absolutely not. Absolutely do not add macros if you want to sell a template. What will happen is organizations will buy it. They'll get that warning message that says, hey, this template has blah, blah, or this Excel file has code running that could be malicious. And it gives you a warning message. A lot of companies will just immediately not be able to use it because of that. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know how to remove it. So I would avoid macros at all costs unless you're doing a template that specifically requires a macro. If you want to ask more questions, Alan, just drop them in the chat, though. I've obviously, you probably know that I do a lot of templates, so I do have a lot of thoughts on it. Okay, so we have to think about, we don't have room here to put a label in for our profit. So how are we going to do that? What we're going to do is first we're going to try adding it. I always just try first with labels. I'll do inside end. Okay, so let's change this to a different color. Nope, that's not readable. So unfortunately, it's tough to get enough contrast on this one. That kind of works. It's not as readable as I'd like it to be. Mark Uneva also says yes, and some antivirus will also try to strip the macros out of the file. He's exactly right. Mark is exactly right on that one. So I send out templates on the newsletter. It's like a free tutorial thing I send out to people, and there's always deliverability issues because of people's antivirus stuff being super, super strict. So I used to have a template in that newsletter that had macros in it, but it would get blocked, and I would get like 100 messages a day from people saying, hey, I couldn't get the file, it didn't work, because of all of the different firewall stuff and antivirus stuff people have set up. So yeah, short answer, don't put macros into a template if you have to send it to lots and lots of different people. If you're in your own organization and you know that people will be able to use it, that's a different story, of course. But yeah, okay. Right, we've still got 8 people on. Great. Okay, thanks for bearing with me, everybody. So we were just thinking about, hey, what color scheme should we stick with here? So I think you're right in one regard here. So I think our sales, we want to keep consistent. So maybe we start with that. And then our profit, maybe we can change that to something that white text will show up on. So what if we do like, I don't know if this is going to look great, so I'm just kind of experimenting here. Yeah, purple's too purple. That won't work. So a lot of my color stuff that I do, people ask me about how do I use color kind of all the time. And what I often tell people is that color is kind of iterative for me. I don't just like know instantly. I'm often doing a decent amount of experimenting to figure out what colors work best. And yeah, I wish it was like an easy, straightforward process where it's like I use this color using this system every single time. But unfortunately, I at least am not good enough with color for that to work for me. I have to really iterate. I have to try a color, see it, say, hey, that maybe seems too bright or too dark or whatever else, and adjust it as I go. Mark Uneva says, I like your style figuratively and literally. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Okay, cool. So, you can tell the difference there. Okay, so we got some metrics on the page. We're starting to have some useful insights in here. Sales to profit ratio, 14%. We might want to change the date range for this. Like, we might want to have it be a specific date range here at some point, but for now, I'm just going to leave it in there. Let's think about what else we can do with our space. So a couple of things I have not done in this dashboard, and I might adjust to do this. So I like to have lots of context, over-explain things instead of under-explain things to people, right? If you're building a report, you're probably quite familiar with your data, but whoever's looking at it, right, whoever you're sharing with it, probably knows a lot less than you do. So always over-explain things. And ideally, like in this top section, I would actually leave an area for text that's like explaining, here's what you need to know. Here's kind of the metadata, like where's our data from? When is it reported? What system do we use? That kind of thing. Here's what these metric names mean. That sort of thing really matters. Adam Goodrich says, I don't have time at work to watch this right now. I hope you're going to post to regular YouTube so we can reference later. Adam, yeah, this will just, the stream I think gets recorded and then they automatically post it on the page, I think. One of the things I love about YouTube. Okay, cool. Wow, we have 10 people in here. Hey, welcome everybody who came in. It is midday on a Friday, so I was not expecting many people to tune in, but great to see you all here. Okay, where are we? So what else can we toss in here? You know, as much as I've been belly aching about how I don't really want to show another time series beneath this time series, I'm wondering if maybe we need to, right? Just because the pertinent information here is time series focused. I guess there is something else. Okay, we have geodata in here. I've been trying to use geocharts less lately in Excel because not everybody actually has access to geocharts in Excel. It's only for certain versions. So I kind of wanted to skip the geocharts. We've got profit by... I got an idea. So how about this? I know people don't like pie charts and donut charts, but sorry, I use them all the time. I think they're super valuable in a lot of situations. So I apologize ahead of time for the pie chart and donut chart that I'm about to expose you all to. So let's drop it in here. So referencing our table, we're just dropping in a pivot chart. Pivot charts are under the insert tab. We're going to go to our pivot chart fields over on the right here. And we are going to, somebody says, would sales / profit by product / category? Yeah, I like where you're going, Mark. I think we're going to do something just like that. Yeah. Okay, so let's go in here. We know that this is broken down by product / category. We did not break it down yet by product though. I think we only use segment. So we're going to grab product. We're going to grab sales, and we're going to grab profit. And it gives us this. And this is actually just unto itself a very useful chart. We don't even really have to do anything more to this. But if we want, we can get fancy. So I just copy pasted it over. I always like to put the chart over the dashboard before I start like styling it and stuff, so I can figure out how big it's going to be, how much room it's going to take up, all that kind of stuff. So here's what I'm thinking. This is a very similar chart to the one above it, right? We have sales and profit ratio up here. So what if we take the visual metaphor from this bar and we apply it right here in our double bar chart, right? That might sound confusing when I say it that way, but I'll show you. So we're going to take out our background, take out our border, make our fonts so that they're legible. We're going to make them white in this case because we have a dark background. This legend, I don't think it's going to be necessary because we're going to use the same legend as above. So we're going to take that out. We need to style our values here, and I forgot to do that when I created my pivot chart. So we're just going in here to our pivot chart, go to pivot table fields, right click on them, field settings, and then we're just going to change these to the type of value we want. I'm going to go with current, we're going to go with counting. And just for context, everyone, I'm not a financial modeler, by any stretch of the imagination. It's not what I do for most of my work. So I'm doing my best here. I'm just using my experience starting and running businesses as my loose guide. If you are a financial modeler, you're going to know way more about this than I do and probably have a lot of ideas about how I should handle it, but we're more illustrating how to make really cool, interesting, visually engaging reports here, more than we're focused on pro-level financial modeling. I'm not somebody who's competing in the Excel Financial Modeling World Cup, which exists, and I think they aired it on ESPN. So solid fill, we had that. We did it like a little more transparent, and then we had a line around it that was white. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just kind of loosely getting this to match what we have above, and then we're clicking into our other series. We're trying to make that that color, okay? And then what we're doing is when you click into a bar chart, if you have multiple bars, you can go to series options under format data series, and you can change your series overlap and your gap width. So we're going to do our series overlap to 100 so that they overlap with each other, and then maybe reduce our gap width a little so that the bars are a little bigger. Just kind of going by feel here. How does that look? That looks okay. We forgot to add a line to this though. So the real question here is, do we need to add another legend, right? So this is kind of, there's not a right answer to this all the time, but as you see, and sorry, let me get these. I don't like, if I look at a chart like this, and you see how these grid lines are just super bright and super, like, they draw your attention away in a lot of ways. Grid lines, in my opinion, should not be distracting from the data, right? They should just be a helpful background guide. So I like to do dashed as the style for them, and I like to make them pretty transparent so they just fade into the background. Okay, anyways, so here's the question. And again, like I said, I don't think there's a right answer to this. We've got a legend here, and we're using the same visual metaphor with these bars here. Do we need a second legend? I don't think we do, personally. I think people are smart enough to figure this out. But there are many who would, there are many people who would disagree with me on this point. So to each their own, but in this case, I'm going to leave one legend. So, okay, so we did all that, and like, I don't know how long the stream's been going. It hasn't been that long, and we've got like a pretty cool, let me zoom out so you can see the whole thing. We've made like this cool little card dashboard here. I was making this narrow because I was going to stream this on TikTok or post a video to TikTok. So it's like this weird layout, like for mobile. But anyway, we've created a cool little dashboard here that I actually think has useful insights. The underlying concepts for it aren't that difficult, in my opinion. Like, if you know how to use pivot charts, if you know how to click into your chart elements and play with the editing window and stuff, you can make pretty cool stuff like this in Excel. And it's actually not all that much harder than like building something like this in any other BI tool. Anyway, for people that just joined a little late, no big deal, but let me show you how we structured this. So we have sample data that we used. The sample data all came from this Microsoft data set, just their financial sample data. What we did is we took all of that and we kind of summarized it in pivot tables, right? So if you know how to use a pivot table, we just inserted pivot tables with the data we wanted and then put in a couple little lookups. These lookups were just grabbing the bottom value, so the most recent month. That's what all these little lookups are doing, saying, give me the most recent value and put it up at the top. We referenced all those in our dashboard, so our text boxes are all just a text box, and then in your formula bar you just hit equals and you can point it at a cell. So you hit equals, click the cell, and then the text box will just reference the cell. Everything else here is pivot charts. So we can do one other little fun thing here, which is we can filter all of this. We can turn it into a dynamic dashboard if we want to. So we just built a bunch of charts with a bunch of pivot tables. We can take it a step farther by clicking into any of our pivot tables, hitting insert, going to slicer, and we're going to do slicer by, what should we do slicer by? Let's do sales. No, that's not right. Excuse me. Let's do country. There we go. And then we can also do timeline. So we're going to click in, go to design. No, excuse me. Go to insert, and we're going to go timeline. So one note here, I didn't do a good job naming my pivot tables, and you're going to see why that's a problem in a second, but let me just get these and bring them over to our cool little dashboard. Don't worry, we'll style these in a second. I know they're kind of hideous looking right now. Okay, so if we right click this guy and we go report connections, we can connect it to all of our pivot tables. And what this is going to do is now allow us to filter our dashboard down to individual countries that are listed in our source table, right? So now we've got a dynamic filterable dashboard that lets us drill down into our data. That's awesome. The slicer looks hideous though, so I actually have a whole timeline slicer style sheet thing I built a long time ago because I really don't like slicer designs in Excel. I like this one. We'll use this one. And one of the ways I know when somebody has used my templates, like when somebody tries to steal one of my templates and resell it, which happens all the time, I know it's mine because nobody knows how to edit slicers for the most part. So I can always look at the slicer and tell if it was my template or not. Okay. So we're going to go over here. So what you do is if you paste in a slicer from another document, what will happen is under your slicer menu, a new style will show up in custom. So if I use this style now, it will update my slicer to look that way, and then I can just delete the old one. Cool. So now, oh, sorry, you guys can't see what I'm looking at because I put it behind my head. So now we have this. This is our country selector now. Okay, there we go. And I've noticed that the misalignment of these charts is starting to show up now. So there is work to be done to get these all organized and aligned properly. Again, it's very important that you get those aligned perfectly because if they're just a little off, you'll see it. Okay, awesome. And then for our timeline, so here's the thing. What do we want to connect this timeline to, right? If you have a report and you have a date filter on your report, in this case like a timeline selector, what charts do you want that timeline selector to actually impact? What metrics do you want it to impact? This is something I think people should always consider. So in this case, we've got a few different things. We've got metrics that are the latest month reported. We've got metrics that are every single date available to us over time. We've got metrics that are aggregates of all time, right? So these all kind of work in different ways. And how a date selector would affect these is actually not an easy, intuitive thing. For this one, would it only show the date selected, or do we leave this to always show all dates available? It can be a little confusing. So before anything, I'm going to style this. Give me a second. We're going to grab my handy dandy slicer, or excuse me, timeline design. Drop that in. And Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. Kyle McClellan, thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, hit me with them, by the way. Happy to answer questions as we go. And let me go report connections here. And what do we want this connected to? Now, you'll notice I did not name my pivot tables. Don't be like me. Be better than me. Name your pivot tables. Because I didn't name my pivot tables, it's kind of confusing knowing what to select. So I'm just going to select everything for a sec. And then let's see what happens here. So this goes all the way up to our last date available. So that's just 1 month. Here's multiple months. And we see that things are starting to get a little funky. They're behaving oddly, and that's because the width of our charts changes depending on that selection. So we have to really this is the tricky part of having chart overlays like I have here, is you really have to stress test them to get them to work properly. Let me scroll over here. One note, if you do decide you want to add a timeline like this, a timeline selector, keep in mind that the interface is not perfect. It's a little laggy. It can behave a little oddly. It doesn't always do exactly what you expect it to do. So I say to people typically just use use your timelines wisely. You're seeing all of the possible impacts that adding a timeline can have here, and it just adds a layer of complexity and testing you have to do if you add them in there. But I like to put them in as an example. So cool. I mean, I think we have something pretty cool. Like I said, let's try a couple tests here. Yeah, ooh, looks good. So here's Germany, and then we can compare that to the United States. Awesome. Very quick change, quick drill down. Another thing to keep in mind here, and this is like a useful reporting trick I tell people. If you have people and they say, hey, I really like this report, but I really need to be able to compare, Germany to France, what you can do is just replicate this whole thing that you see here, this whole tab, put what you see right here on one side, and then right next to it, put an exact copy, but have slicers tied only to one or the other. And then you can compare them side by side really easily. Nextent says, it's evening in Europe and I'm watching the stream on my TV, enjoying this thoroughly. Oh, thanks, Nextent. That's awesome. Curious, what part of Europe are you in? I always love when people are tuning in from the other side of the world. We can maybe filter if you're in Germany or France to wherever you are in the dashboard here. Okay, let's see. I think maybe the limit on number of pivot tables that the slicer controls. Yeah. Mark, I think that's good. So essentially, this is a UI question, right? We're not really necessarily in just reporting or Excel here. User interfaces in general often have to answer this question of like, hey, my data is connected to my filter. How does that show up to the user? When the user clicks France or Canada or whatever, what do they expect that to do? And when the user clicks the timeline and selects a new date, what do they expect to have happen? So a lot of it is just figuring out what's kind of the intuitive thing. Oh, Nextent's in the Netherlands. Awesome. I always wanted to go out to the Netherlands, and I get a lot of clients in that region for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know. Maybe because I'm not sure. my family, I think a long time ago, came from Sweden. It's kind of close by. All right. So, so we built this thing, and it's cool. I think we have something really neat here. I don't know what the whole elapsed time was. I think we built it in an hour or less than an hour. Styling is a big part of all of this. So for anybody who just tuned in, the text you see here, you can move it around, right? We have not been entering our text into cells. We're putting them in text boxes. So essentially you insert a text box. A text box is just an option under the insert menu. And then when you click your text box, don't enter a value. Just go to the go to the formula bar, hit equals, and then click on whatever cell has the value you want, and it will automatically pull in the value from that cell. That's a much easier way to have metrics you can move around and customize a little more easily. Makes the layout way more easy. And this is all very Mark says very clean design. Nextent says, you do. Maybe I need to start an Excel-based side hustle. Hey, if you do, let me know. I am always desperate for folks to bring into projects and refer projects to, so go for it. It's very hard. It's very easy to find people who know how to use Excel. It's very hard to find people who know how to use Excel in the professional environment that I would need them to be able to do it in, right? So Excel for very big clients requires a certain type of know-how that's very rare, unfortunately, and hard to find. And I'm always looking for folks like that. Oh, Ruchika Karmakar is out in India and is learning to help me deliver better at work. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. You're so welcome, Ruchika. Excuse me, did I say your name right? Yes, Ruchika, I think. Anyway, thank you for tuning in, and that's awesome. Wait, I'm super curious what part of India you're in as well. Where was I on this? We were talking about text boxes. I was mentioning the charts also as well. These are all pivot charts, so that means they're charts tied to a pivot table. Again, just an option under the Insert tab. And I think another element in all this, and this is something I usually say at the beginning, not at the end, but is to start thinking about how these things are layered together, right? So all of our shapes, our text, our our charts, all of it is layered. So if we look here, these are our layers. So we've got our farthest layer back is the actual cell grid, right? Cell A1, cell A2, A3, right? Those are in the farthest layer back. Then we've got our rounded rectangle that kind of defined the outside of our dashboard. Then the separators, or any little sections that we've created inside of it. Then we've added on our text on top of that. That's where all our text is. And our metrics. And then on top of all of that is where our charts and stuff are. And this is just like PowerPoint, right? Like, and in fact, this interface up here is identical to PowerPoint. The shape insert options, the shape formatting, literally exactly the same as PowerPoint. So I always just try to remind people, like, when you're doing the designed element of this, it's all about saying, hey, I'm not just putting data on a page. I'm not just throwing metrics on there and being like, hey, cool, here's a visualization. You're thinking about what you're communicating, right? It's like, imagine you're making a PowerPoint slide. When you make a PowerPoint slide, you think really hard about what terms you're using, if they're clear, if they need more explanation, if you have too much information or too little information on the page. You think about it like you would be writing a report. Like if you wrote a report when you were in school, right? You were thinking about, like, what's my topic sentence? What are my supporting sentences? How many paragraphs do I have here? Do I need an extra supporting paragraph, etc., right? We're doing something similar when we work with data in Excel, and that's what leads to better, easier to understand reports that get used more by clients. Okay, well, I mean, I think I'm going to pause here. I think we built something cool on the stream, and just ask if anyone has questions. If you have anything you want to ask me about, if you have career questions, I can answer them. If you have Excel dashboard design questions, I can answer them. And we can just go from there. I'll show you some fun stuff while we do that. So these are some neon examples that people really love for some reason. They're pretty. These use geocharts. And geocharts are cool because they kind of have this awesome filterability element. So when you put a geochart on the page, it can be a great way of kind of showing a person, hey, here's where the data you're looking at is coming from. They're not super useful for giving insights, right? Like, it's hard to interpret this as, like, how much more is Texas than everywhere else. Like, that's not easy to interpret, but it does do a really good job of telling us, hey, we're looking at central or east or south or west, right? We're looking at these states or those states or this country or that country. It does a really good job of that. All right. Here's an e-commerce dashboard. This is one of the ones from the newsletter. And this is like, typically I would say this is too much information to put on the page. I kind of designed this with the thinking being this would be for like an analyst or something. Somebody who wants a little more information. Mark here says, I need to learn how to better use the double donut chart. Yeah, I mean, double donut charts are fun. They look really good. They're not always the right chart to use. I use them a lot because it's kind of become part of like my brand. People just have associated them with a bunch of the templates I've put out into the world, but they're really good for proportionality across two related data sets. So if you want to show what the proportional breakdown is of two data sets that are broken into like 6 or less categories, it can be a really good chart. If it's more than 6 categories, don't use it. And if the data sets aren't super related to each other, don't use it. But for 2 related sets with 6 or less categories, it's wonderful. It can be really useful. Right. And I don't see any questions in the chat either. So no worries if people don't have questions. There's no pressure. But I'm keeping my eye out. I'm gonna probably tie up the stream here pretty soon. I have to make lunch for myself, and I have to feed my cats, and do all that. So, Mark, you're so welcome for the tips. Super happy they've been helpful, and I'll be doing more streams where people can ask more questions and stuff. What else can I show you all while we wait? Is that the Geodash? This one is the one that people seem to love for some reason. I don't know why, but it seems like every time I've put this in a video, the videos get way more views for some reason. I don't know what that's about. Mark says, I wish you could simul stream on Twitch. Yeah, I've never really used Twitch before. I don't really know how it works. I'm sure there's a way to do it. I'm totally new to streaming. This is all totally new to me. I'm just winging it. Nextent says, I'm going to need to practice and review your video. I will definitely come back with questions. The thing I'm looking into is how to create a dashboard that follows the lifeline of an activity. For example, starting point is 100 leads, then part get rejected and part get accepted. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Nextent, there is a... and then those two categories get split up, etc. So there's a funnel chart that I would start with. I don't know if I have an example here. Hold on, let me open an example. Give me a sec here. Chart examples. Will that work? We'll see if this works. It might not, but hopefully it will. So I think a funnel chart's a great way to start if you just have leads coming in and that they're breaking down over time. This is an example. This is not a good example of a funnel chart, but it's just what a funnel chart looks like. If you think about this one on the right but upside down, that's kind of what you can imagine. And then what you can do is you can combine chart types together, right? So you can have a funnel chart funneling down, and then as soon as they split, you can kind of visually show that they split and then have two separate breakdowns for the categories they split into. So it doesn't need to all be the same chart. Yeah, so funnel chart combined with other chart types might be a good answer. I love that though. That's a great challenge kind of question. I really like that. Okay, everybody, I think I have to sign off now. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Ruchika, let me just answer your question real quick. Is there any way to add custom formatted cell to a text box? The only way I'm aware is to paste a special linked picture. So it depends on your special formatting, Ruchika. You can carry over your font style into a text box, but you can't carry over other formatting probably. So like, right, we can insert a text box and it can go, hey, this is, let me just do it for you so you see it. We've dropped in a text box, and then let's say we want to style that so there's no background and stuff. So we remove our fill and the line. And then we hit equals in our formula bar, and then we click on wherever we want. Now, by default, it's pulling over the same font style as the cell. So it'll keep the fonts, but it might not keep all the conditional formatting and stuff. I hope that helps. Okay, I gotta go, everyone. Thank you all so much. I will be back with more soon. I'm still testing this out, testing out times a day, just testing out what to talk about, all that. Thank you all for tuning in, and if you haven't joined the newsletter, obviously go do that, because that's where I send out all the free templates. This is the one that I sent out today, actually, funny enough. And if you have questions, comments, just drop them in either the chat or comment on any of the videos, and I'll keep an eye on that if you want me to cover any topics in particular next time. Thanks so much.